Hey everyone, Eggman here with another video. We've got our first, I think, video of 2025 at least released. It's recording right on the cusp of it. We've got a team talk with Yonas, Russell, and Jackson as we get into our Card Fest this weekend. How are you guys doing? We'll start with Yonas and we'll go the way down.
I'm doing great. Been doing a lot of testing for OP09 Nats, but I think I'm in a fine spot.
Yeah, yeah. I know it's like a high pressure. It's been a lot of like the holidays too, so there hasn't been like a lot of official events. And for the first time in a minute, I feel like there's been a lot of people like kind of hoarding their strategies just a little bit. I think it's understood, but generally from most of One Piece, it's like it's pretty open on what people are playing or how they're playing it. But it's just definitely like the feeling of the air. Like people are taking this really seriously. This is one of the biggest events of the year, at least for the competitive season, and a lot of people want to do well. So I think that's understood. So, and then how are you doing, Russell?
I'm good. I just got back from Canada and I
Yeah.
did zero testing, and I honestly don't think it's gonna affect me much. I've been consuming a lot more content lately,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been hopping in a lot more like lower viewer Twitch streams and just kind of sitting
I
by
did
and just like
notice you in my streams lately, so thank you very much.
you're wild. You're so wild. Anyway, I'm talking about like the sixes and eights. Like we're down there where it's just his homies on a call,
Yeah.
and like they're like, all right, yeah. But I've just been consuming a lot more content knowledge and coming up with my own like theories, especially. I mean, like I'm playing Bonnie. It's no secret.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like with that said, it's just like more ways that I can just kind of analyze how Bonnie should approach particular turns,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that makes me more confident than I was at least like in the last event because Lucci was running everywhere, and then now there shouldn't be as much. Like I highly doubt this guy.
No,
I'm good.
and jokes aside too, like I do think there's a lot of just there's so many people here. There's so much I think worth testing right now, and that other people are trying different avenues. Even when I've been doing streaming, I've been people jump into my chat, say, "Hey, have you thought about this card?" And just getting like the community together and seeing different builds and stuff. I think is really invaluable too. So I think that's a good process, and obviously supporting other creators out there too. So. I think that's really good. And then we've got Jackson. He's you got a high stress weekend ahead of you, right? You need this win. This is you can't afford to lose it. How are you doing going into it?
Yeah, I know. I've been just grinding 24/7. I really need this. Nah, I'm just kidding. Honestly, it's kind of fun just because like obviously all my friends really want to do well. They want to make awards as well. So like I like don't want to parade too much, but like I've been taking it pretty easily. Like it's very little testing or very little low stress testing. Like I think I haven't even decided on deck yet. I can probably change my mind in a couple of days. But yeah, mostly I just want to be there for my friends who need practice because I want them to make worlds as well. But other
Mm-hmm.
than that, testing has been pretty chill. And yeah, I think after this event finishes, then I'll probably get into like hard grind mode for worlds.
Yeah, and in case you guys don't know on this, Jackson does have his world invite already. He did win the Card Fest finals in Texas earlier this year. So, but he is still qualified for this one. We don't know the format for worlds quite yet, but regardless, is a good testing scenario just to do being able to play the game. This is one of the highest stakes tournaments in the event this season, so I think that's going to be very strong, and I think he's going to do well as well. So makes sense why you're playing, even though you have your invite already, because it's really good testing for the world's format as well. So. And that's it. There's me. I won't be there. I'll be cheering from California for y'all, and I am really excited to see how you guys do and what the event is, because this is again like a really I think good format for this event. I know that the Card Fest finals in Dallas, we had kind of a day one unexplored format, and then this one's a little bit more known. And I've talked to you kind of individually, but you guys are generally more favored on to knowing a format, even if it's maybe potentially like a little bit worse, right?
I think I'm the opposite. I'd rather have that surprise factor and
Mm.
then reward the testing circles that do well. So
Mm-hmm.
I like the unknown format where everybody can just come in and win. If you're testing to discover something crazy, then you deserve the win.
Sure. That's generally what I personally like, but I also know that there's some people who want to know what they're going into, right, and to be able to get that prep. So it is a bit of a gamble at the same time, but I do like seeing from a spectator's point of view, someone who's got nothing on the line for it, to be able to see what people bring and what does well. I think that's really entertaining and interesting at the same time.
I'm more of a deck builder that I think that in an unknown format I tend to do a little bit better. I just like to build like relatively interesting things and kind of exploit that fact. But I know a lot of really, really good players are more like people that refine deck lists, that tune deck lists, and are much better in a known field. So depending on your strengths versus weaknesses, you kind of prefer one or the other. But I prefer this kind of unknown format for the most part.
Yeah, and I think it's sometimes kind of obscured. Some people are really good deck builders, and some people are really good players. I think players get a little bit more of the fame of it, but I know I won't out them, but I know a lot of people who are just like, yeah, I don't know how to deck build in this game at all. I've got my friend Steve. Steve gives me the build. It's perfect. I play it, and I do very well with it. And I think that's something that's lost sometimes because people. Usually it's the pilot who gets most of the fame of it. No fault for anyone except for just they're the one who gets the trophy, right?
Yep.
So, well, cool. Well, we've got we're going to talk about a little bit into the end of this year. Our thoughts with the first little bit of the OP09 format. I also asked each one of our guests today to show me the, as of recording, their second best deck going into this. I don't want them to spoil their deck that they're taking to Card Fest or anything like that. But I do think that there's a lot of decks that are viable right now. There's a lot of people who are trying different things, trying to counter the meta, especially since we don't know what the meta looks like 100% right now, even though this is the first one we've had in a minute where it's the same card list as Japan, right? For the beginning of OP07 and beginning of OP08, we had restrictions that weren't in place for Japan when they start off their metas, and because of that we had some shifts with it. But even though our card pool is exactly the same, I've been noticing some decks are doing better and some decks are doing a little bit worse with that. So one that I think we can all kind of talk about first is Teach. I think a lot of people, including myself, thought Teach was going to be really strong, and it's kind of been not so strong, I think, in these first couple of weeks, and I'm curious what you guys are thoughts about it. So Russell, what's your thoughts on Teach right now in OP09?
I still think the deck's insanely powerful. I understand why it did well over in the East, given like how many rounds they play. But I also believe like it's more diverse over there. It because we have a lot of Dofi players and a lot of Pluffy players, and having tested those matchups against weaker players and then having tested them against really strong players, it feels very awkward to pilot. I know that I forgot which Italian streamer. I'm pretty sure it's Luigi. They just had their tournament over the past weekend, and then one made top 8 that ran no stages, and they said it's better into the Dofi matchup. And then they lost to Aggro Shanks and lost to BY Luffy, and so I'm not sure if the consistency caused a reason between of why it didn't find success against BY Luffy, which is rather regarded as an easy matchup if they don't draw Rygos, like multiple Rygos or something. But it was just enough of like I was playing Blackbeard for quite some time. I took enough losses to Dofi players and Pluffy players, and board states where I felt like no matter how I played it, I kind of didn't have a chance at winning, which is extremely frustrating, especially when you're piloting such like a control oriented deck. So it's a lot of thinking, and a lot of it's like a lot of stress, a lot of thinking into the most popular and best deck in the format, in my opinion, Blue Dofi, and it's too much of a mental toll that I would want to take into a big tournament like Nationals, especially one where it's a smaller tournament compared to normal, meaning every round's going to be that much more important to find success in. And I would think that people understanding that, because my opponents will also be intelligent, should be running Blue Dofi. And I shouldn't be playing Blackbeard into a field of people who should draw the conclusion that they should be running Dofi as well. And if not, they can run Pluffy if they don't feel as confident in piloting Dofi, which is why I think it's like the best backup plan to have. If you're a Lucci player and you're lost right now, I'm pretty sure you should be playing Dofi or Pluffy. And if it's too late to play Dofi, you just play Pluffy right now. And both of those are not matchups I want to put Blackbeard into. For
sure. And real quick, I'm going to switch over to this scene here. So we did have a pretty large event. This was kind of I think like a benefit of circumstance where this was officially our first OP09 tournament, even though it wasn't scheduled to be so. We had the booster box online treasure cup, and there was a lot of good data, I think, just kind of on the surface level for this. Obviously this was a tournament where the stakes weren't super high. This isn't where you could get like a regional invite. You could get some pretty expensive cards, right? But most people, I think, were kind of testing for what this format's going to be. But we do see, as kind of mentioned, like Doflamingo and Purple Luffy will take up about 50% of the room, and if that's a pretty negative matchup for you, something like Teach, I think, is going to be having a hard time, which is kind of why I think it didn't top 32 an event like this, was because you had just so much of your of a negative matchup going into those two right out the gates.
I do think that Blackbeard only really had like the Dofi matchup that was really rough in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
But when Blackbeard had a bunch of success in that back-to-back weekend in Japan CSs, it was mostly due to the fact that the deck was relatively rogue. And even after the fact, like Blackbeard representation in like the subsequent CSs wasn't really that high. It didn't really perform very well afterwards either, because I think it was just too much of a known quantity and a lot of people over prepared for it.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think that deck can like be a standalone like beat everything deck when these aggressive decks like Luffy, like Dofi kind of are the predominant like parts of the format.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think like the West has always been so top centric. Like whatever deck is perceived as the best, like the top player is gonna, aggregate to it, and it's gonna just make the number look even bigger than it did in like the East or anything. So if everybody thinks Dopi's the best deck, then a lot of top players are gonna be on it, and then you don't want to see your worst matchup like in half your games. And yeah, like even when Sakazuki is a big thing, like you can have a reverse effect where you think about what the best deck is, and then you try to counter it. I know that Victor Pham did that. Like he played RP Luffy, which is a rogue deck, because he expected a lot of Sakazuki, and he faced a lot of them, and he did well with it. So I think Blackbeard's kind of facing the reverse of that, where you have bad matchup to the worst or the best deck in the format.
Yeah, and I think like Dofi's obviously has been super strong since 8.5. With the new star deck stuff, and a lot of decks became kind of viable again because they had a pretty good matchup into Doflamingo. So seeing the reverse is pretty tough, I think, in a lot of ways. I also think Yonas made a good point too, where I've noticed this personally. I haven't collated a lot of the data for it, but a lot of like the Asian metas and metas outside North America, they tend to just try the newer stuff and play with more of the newer stuff outright. Meanwhile, here in North America, we play the best deck that we think is good, which is why like we have so many people on Rob Lucci all the time, which is why people are on Sakazuki all the time. Even though it's like an older deck, if it's the one that we still perceive the best, right? Which is why we also had like Zoro, Law, and Whitebeard just so present for a lot of the 2023 season. That I think is something that's strong for people in North America and in our meta, where they just will play with the deck that they perceive is the best, not necessarily the newest deck that might be a little bit better, a little bit stranger. And I've seen that time and time again off the results I've been comparing between the two. So one thing I will say that because of that kind of mentality, and something that I've been seeing do, I think maybe a little bit better than it did in Asia, was Shanks so far. I think the first couple weeks Shanks has been pretty strong. It obviously won the booster box one. I also did a pretty large box tournament, case tournament this past weekend as well, where it did end up winning that as well. What are you guys' thoughts with Shanks? We'll start with Yonas and work our way down.
I feel like in some ways we are ahead of Japan in Asia in terms of like playing our decks. We're playing refinements of other lists, but sometimes I feel like we're just doing the same cycle. And in this case, I think it's just the same cycle all over again. In the beginning of OP09 in Japan, Shanks was also winning a lot of the major events, largely due to the fact that people weren't really comfortable playing against this deck and understanding how to attack into it. And when your opponents don't really know how to attack into it, how to punish you particularly well, and the fact that these cards are just inherently very powerful. Yeah. 8 costs freely, 10 cost Shanks, so just very, very powerful cards. And this deck can just like dominate in the relatively unprepared field. So I wasn't really surprised to see it, but I'm not really super optimistic about it either.
Yeah, so you told me this, I think as a joke, but I've heard people echo this since then. You might even know what I'm saying. We didn't preface this. This is you say this is pretty much red NL, right? It's like
this is red NL.
Right, with just like a little bit less defense, a little bit less card cycle. But man, if you see your pieces on your crit, like you just win every game, right? That's kind of how it feels.
Yeah, that's basically all it is. It's a relatively inconsistent top end heavy deck that requires your opponent to understand how to attack into you to beat. But it's relatively inconsistent but still pretty powerful. So. Red or no?
Yeah. What about you, Russell? Any other thoughts about Shanks?
I think Shanks is pretty absurd. I don't know. Okay, so the one time I piloted it, I god drew and hit my perfect curve, and then when I play against it, they always hit 4 or 5, and then 7 or 8, and then 10, and then once they do that, they have nothing else.
Yeah.
Like it's felt like that every single time. Like they hit their one curve, I'm playing Bonnie or Smoke or something ridiculous, and
Sure.
we have to go to like 10 on turn multiple times, and then they just slowly like burn out. And so in that way, I was like, oh, I guess it is kind of like a Nell, where like if I just sit there and kind of do nothing, it works out. I think the deck's fine. I'm not gonna recommend it or pilot it. Just because as crazy as it sounds, it feels so balanced. Into a format full of other decks that just do such ridiculous things. That like the 10 drops, and it's just all right. So it's Rayleigh and then 10 drop Shanks is basically the deck. And if you can find those, it feels absurd. And when you don't, you're like, all right, well, here we go. Let's go Ben Beckman, I guess. And like, oh, but they curved out. So Ben Beckman, you're kind of useless right now. And then I like the Red Hawk version just because it can deal with Dofi. And I think Dofi's such a monster in the format that I would want to play that instead. And that's not the one that won. So
you say that. I played some games with Jackson with the Red Hawk version, and he just played around Red Hawk the entire time. I'm like, why am I even playing this card? Like,
yeah.
Once and I think that kind of what Yonas was saying too. Like, once this is a known quantity in this meta, it gets worse, right? Once people know that, oh, if I attack 6K, they lose a card no matter what. It doesn't matter if it's a 1K or 2K. And by and large, like, your top end is just if your deck likes you or not that shuffle, right? There's just so many times where I'm like, well, man, if I saw 10 drop Shanks on 10 Dawn, I was winning and I didn't, so I lost. I agree on that it can probably win against every deck that's around right now, but it also can lose in about the same variance, and that's kind of tough for trying to go X1 in a field of the best players in North America, perhaps. So I think that can be tricky. So anything from you, Jackson, before we move to something else?
No, I think it's just everybody said it. It's just a really fair deck. I don't think it's particularly too good or too bad. And like even I submitted Shanks to that Treasure Cup. I didn't make it because I didn't wake up in time for it. But I think I think part of it was that like it's such a cool leader. Like we haven't been able to play Red in a long time. A lot of people were like, I know a lot of my friends are also playing Shanks as well, and they just wanted to try it out. But I'm not like fairly optimistic that I think it's the best deck or anything.
Yeah, I had a lot of high hopes because I like more like mid-range control kind of style decks. Played a lot of Marco, which was like one of the first ways that Red could actually be a control deck. I'm like, oh, Shanks will be the natural evolution. And I'm like, oh, I'm just kind of sitting and watching the game. It's I'm not really controlling it. It's controlling me. And I just didn't appreciate the gameplay style. I think the deck's still going to do well, but it also kind of reminds me of like Purple Luffy and OP05, where it's just like, oh, sure, Purple Luffy, if you see all your stuff, if you see Kaido on 9 Dawn, oh, you're great. You're a fantastic player. Oh, you didn't see it because there's no searchers or hard draws for it? Well, sorry. So I've been having the same issue with Shanks. I like decks with, even if the ceiling isn't as high, I like it to have like a little bit more consistency, and Shanks isn't there, at least from the builds that I've been testing either. So well, cool. I think that this is I don't know. I think there's a lot of decks that are around right now, and we can kind of jump into the decks that you guys presented to me. So again, these are decks that you guys are not taking as of recording. You guys could maybe switch back at the moment, but these are decks you thought you're worth taking and just didn't jump for it. But we're going to start off with I believe this is Jackson's version of Rob Lucci, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so I guess my theory behind Lucci is that like it's a good meta call right now because Shanks is popular, Purple Luffy is popular, and Dofi is probably like slightly favoring towards you. The thing that I was using Rob Lucci that I really love and I'm a fan of is Finger Pistol. I accidentally tested into Yonas with like 4 of them in my deck when I only meant to play 2.
Yeah.
And I just never like felt like I didn't want to see it. It kind of reminds me of how Lucci used to play against RP Law in OP7, where you just kind of need to stem the early game and just survive until you get to your warrior turns. So if you ever miss a turn of removal, then you fall behind. Finger Pistol kind of ensures that you don't miss that turn of removal, and you can get a lucky trigger out of life to help you even more. So yeah, that was my thought behind Lucci. I was never really a Lucci player. I played it once for one Treasure Cup, I believe, and did pretty well with it. And like I love the control aspect of it. So I was really thinking about bringing this to Cardfest, and it ended up not doing it just because some days you have bad days on Lucci where you just don't draw anything or you just draw really poorly. And I didn't want to put myself in that position.
Sure. And I think it's something, again, a lot of people, I think, immediately, even just to test it, went from Rob Lucci to see, is Teach a deck that's real right now? And I think a lot of people are concluding, no, I appreciate my security blanket of Rob Lucci removal. So I think that we'll probably see a big uptick from the first week to this week where people are playing Rob Lucci. I will say that your build isn't doing anything against you are, I think, more susceptible to something like Teach right now. Do you think that that's something Rob Lucci players will need to kind of adjust to, or you think you can just kind of hopefully just dodge that matchup for most of the weekend?
Yeah, so funnily enough, I think Finger Pistol, I think one of my friends, Georgie, actually brought it to me that it might be a good answer to Teach because you have Finger Pistol Ice Age to get rid of their 10 costs. So I think that that's why I'm not playing Kaido. That's probably the biggest glaring difference between mine and other people's builds is that they're playing a lot of Kaido, and I honestly never liked the card. I don't think it's terrible in Dofi, of course, but I never thought it was that great into BY as well. Because you're just playing 2 defensively, and then against Blackbeard is probably where it gets the most mileage, and it's really good there. But I think that being able to play Finger Pistol Ice Age to do almost the same thing is pretty good as well. And then also I'm also high on the Hina accounts too because Hina plus your leader is also a clean answer to 10 costs with Finger Pistols, like the 10 Shanks, 10 Dofi. And sometimes they just spiral out of control when you can't answer that 110 that drops.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. And yeah, I do think Rob Lucci, it can beat most things. I've also kind of seen it, and I think it's because BY Luffy's been a little bit less greedy lately. It's been kind of evening out that matchup. I don't think it's as bad as it used to be, with them not running as much Kuzans, or with the inclusion of Raigo, that kind of muddies it up a little bit. So I don't think Rob Lucci has any super terrible matchups. What would be your most feared matchup, I guess, playing with Rob Lucci then, if you were?
I think definitely still Teach and BY. Teach is probably worse than BY right now. But the BY matchup has probably gotten better just because they are dropping down on Kuzans, like you said.
Gotcha. Cool. And any last minute advice or anything for people who are taking Rob Lucci to Cardfest, or any other kind of closing thoughts?
Whatever you believe brings you good luck, do it, because I can imagine whoever is the luckiest Lucci player that day can win the whole thing.
Yeah, that is kind of a theme. At least for you and Yonas, I think both you guys will confidently say that you're just luckier than average. Not even you're not even bragging, but I know that both of you guys are yeah, I just lucked out. I don't I was in the right place at the right time a lot of the time. So just whatever you do, have your favorite meal the night before, whatever techniques you have for that. I think that's a solid way to help you out. So, well, cool. Well, thanks for sharing your Rob Lucci build, and let's go to, I think this is Russell's build of Purple Luffy.
Yeah, Purple Luffy doesn't get too crazy. Mine's nearly what just won the qualifier over at the EU tournament for No Heroes.
Gotcha.
Except I really would like to play Charlotte Linlin. I've been blown out by that card way too many times not to want to include at least one in the list. And I also really like Nico Robin, just because I think the way I visualize him play against and with Pluffy, you enter such simplified board states because the deck's inherently it has a very solid game plan. And if you ever stray away from 9-drop 1 open or 7-drop with whatever, I kind of want to use that extra 2 Don I have left over to drop in another blocker as opposed to applying pressure. Because I kind of, since I've been playing Teach, I've had this why not one more turn kind of mentality, and especially with a deck that runs Gum Giant, you kind of consistently get to just even out your opponent's turn. So if you have a mediocre or a decent turn, or if you have board or in your even board state, you can force one extra turn because of Gum Giant. And then if that was a turn where oh, I'm just gonna go 7 Luffy plus another card, and then I'll Nico Robin have 1 open, and they're not gonna lethal you, or that them expending any kind of resources to tap or pop Nico Robin is just all you want to establish that board state and then turn the tides of the tempo of the game. I'd rather do that than have the extra 2Ks that he had in his list when he won with it. Again, I'm greedy because I'm a green player and I'm used to playing Bonnie, and so I'm not used to all this aggression that probably come at me when I have to consistently take my own life. But the 2 games I play with Pluffy, and the way I visualize in my head, I would want something similar to this exact list. I also really, really, really like Gum Giant, and I was gonna submit RP Luffy as like the lip I might not bring. Then I saw you streaming with it today. I was like, all right, I'm not doing that. I'm just gonna put in Floofy
Yeah,
instead.
that's my boy. I'm
I
sorry.
have to bring up that the only reason I would run this deck is because Gum Gun Giant.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely phenomenal. The card's so oppressive to deal with on like every other deck I've been playing.
Yeah, definitely. My list I brought is RP. We will definitely talk about it. This card a little bit more, but yeah, this is an absurd card in so many ways. Like even if you're not at 10 Dawn, like it's a get out of jail free card, and it reminds me a lot of like Whitebeard. And obviously with a 6K leader, it's a lot more like Whitebeard. With Purple Luffy, you still get to do some Whitebeard stuff, which is nice. But yeah, I think that this deck is likely one of the best things it's been. I don't know what it is, but apparently January is the month for Purple Luffy because it was in OP05 last year, and that's going to be this year. It's going to be a pretty viable deck, and it's been interesting to see just how more popular it has been, at least from people bringing it in the first place. People really like what this deck is doing. So what's your thoughts on the new 9-drop secret rare in general for the deck?
It's insane. I mean, I know that's why he played 4 of it. Aggression and draw on a card is just phenomenal. And I mean, you don't really need to be constantly going to like 10 every turn.
Sure.
Also, like, just I mean, it gains rush and draws you a card. The whole deck is like, if you have good fundamentals as a card game player, and you haven't even played One Piece before, I'm pretty sure I can give you Ploofy and be like, here, go have a fun time. Every card does exactly what it says, and it's exactly what you want. And they're like, oh, so it's just free +1s left and right. And I think that's the kind of deck I would want to play into a tournament like Orlando Card Fest.
Yeah.
But don't have enough practice. I'm not a purple player. I can't be doing this. Can't do that.
And so my one thing with Purple Luffy, and it's gotten better since release, and it's been getting better, I think, incrementally since OP05. But the consistency, I think, has been always the biggest issue with this deck. Now, with the star deck, we got the 4-drop Zoro Juro. With OP09, we got Trafalgar Law, which is just a really good search target, card that we really didn't need, but we got anyways, so we're going to use it. Have you found that the consistency for a deck like this is where you want it to be, or are there still times like, man, I didn't see Luffy Taro on 7 Dawn, I lose the game? Is that what's your thoughts?
I don't understand how this deck could be more inconsistent than the other decks that people are piloting in this format anyways.
Sure.
Outside of maybe Blue Dofi. Like, because Dofi does whatever it wants. But like anything else you can recommend, I mean, I'm pretty sure the discussion is going to come like, oh, what about consistency of it? We just talked about Shanks, and he was running 4 Udo, and we were still like, I don't know if you can draw your Rayleigh, like all that kind of stuff. You're taking your own life, you're taking hits, and and you're searching via Law and via Zoro Joro. You have double searching, you're chilling, just like Bonnie. Like, if you complain because you didn't see a 9-drop Shanks, that's valid. But like, if you didn't see anything else, you're like, all right, well, you didn't find your other searchers too. And so I don't know how I could say Bonnie's consistent, but Ploofy isn't, because it doesn't sound like as theoretically sound in my eyes. So I think the deck's fairly consistent and strong. I'm sorry if you don't hit your perfect curve, but like in most decks, save Dofi. If you don't hit your perfect curve, you're not really enjoying the game regardless.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think this has been probably the most consistent this deck has ever been. I will only say this, that I think that you not feeling your, like, the drop off from not seeing your perfect curve is big enough where people see it and they maybe get a case of the complainies a little bit. But I do think that there are some kind of backup routes and there are still things to do, but yeah, it's just kind of the nature of card games with, things can only be so consistent, and if they're too consistent, then it's probably bad for the game itself, even though the deck is good. So but yeah, I think that Purple's been in like a really cool spot. Like just as you kind of mentioned, like Lin is such an interesting card for we just as a generic card to make it worth the ramp into, especially for Luffy. Like, yeah, you lose the life to get to it, but it replaces it, right? You get a 9-drop 9K body earlier in the game than you are supposed to, and I think that's something that's really strong. And I don't know, Purple generally hasn't had stuff that's made it worth all the ramping to until I think like OP08, OP09 kind of section. So, and then obviously having like more of the kind of aggressive edge for it there too.
Yeah, it's like stealing away win conditions with Lin when you're at like an even or not like too advantageous of a board state is exactly why I would want to play at least the one copy of it. But I mean, if you just want to play for Luffy, I got no problem with that either. Just like
Yeah.
Linlin's just a cool card. It's blown me out so many times. Like I'll have the Cavendish and they're like, "Oh, Linlin, it's gone," and I was like, "Never mind, my board's done here after
Yeah.
this one." So
Yeah, and I think Linlin's like really good at buying you another turn, which I think like in a deck like this where we are able to put so many big bodies on the board so quickly, we get more from buying another turn than we lose from the resources to get there. So I think that's strong.
And it pairs with the best card in the deck, which is Gum Gum Giant.
Yeah,
and that's like the biggest thing. It's like
yeah,
they go hand in hand of like, oh, one more turn, and I'll ruin any kind of game plan, and then we'll just keep this going more.
Yeah, it is. Gum Gum Giant just makes you feel invincible at times. It's fantastic. Real quick, Jackson, I know you were testing this deck pretty heavily too. Any reasons why you've been a little bit less inclined to play it, or any thoughts on it from that side?
Honestly, just one single reason is just Dofi. Like when you have a unfavorable matchup to the most popular deck and probably the best deck in the format, then it just makes me not want to bring it. Like I'm very high in this deck. If it was a tournament where I can face an even amount of Dofi as any other deck, then I'd probably bring it. But I'm not guaranteed that, so that's really the only reason why. And I've tried things to tech against it. Like I've tried more copies of Linlin, I've tried 7-cost kit, and I've tried like basically every tech you can think of. But it didn't seem like it would consistently help you in that matchup.
Yeah, and then like it wasn't worth the the detriment for potentially other matchups as well. So I can feel that. Like when I haven't done a lot of testing with this, but like at the end of OP08, it's just like it's a race, right? Whoever gets there quicker, and Doflamingo usually gets there a little bit quicker, and they make it feel they make it so you don't want to ramp because that extra life you're losing is really consequential too. So. I can definitely feel that as well. All right, and before we close this out, Yonas, any thoughts on Purple Luffy before we go to your deck?
I still think Purple Luffy is super powerful. I'm just worried mostly about Dofi, like Jackson said, and I think you kind of mentioned it very well before that the difference between like the perfect curve and something slightly off is just night and day. I think it's really hard to come back if you just don't have like Luffy Taro on your first 7-down turn, or if you don't have like any 4-cost body to play on curve. I think a lot of games are over immediately. So that's the main reason I don't want to play it. But the deck's like a lot more consistent than people remember from like 05 or 06.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I kind of almost feel like Magellan with this deck has always been really strong against any kind of late game decks, which is I think a little bit trickier to do in this format when Doflamingo doesn't really care about losing a Dawn for their curve. So I think that's been something that impacts this deck too. But I think it's very strong. I know a lot of people are going to be taking it, and I think you should be confident in taking it too. As mentioned, just Doflamingo has to be a matchup you're aware of. But if you're moderately confident in it, I think it's something that's worth piloting in its own way too. So anyone playing Purple Luffy, good luck on those. I hope you see your curve every time. And to bring to Jonas's deck, we've got Old Reliable. We got Black and Yellow Luffy. This is a deck you're almost bringing to finals. What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think this deck is still very powerful and doesn't really have like absurdly bad matchups going into this. I think that Blackbeard, like we mentioned before, isn't going to be as popular as people have noticed as it was in Japan. But this deck can still function against it. Raigo on 6, or Raigo being able to get rid of a teach or something, is still a very important part of the matchup. And additionally, like the Nightmare or the Fist Luffy can still apply a lot of pressure, and just swinging with your leader can definitely put Blackbeard in a faster clock than people might expect. But that matchup can be fixable, but I still think as you're a slight underdog, and I think the being a 7K leader and using Rocket Luffy against Dofi is still absurdly powerful. If you're playing against decks like Shanks, combination of Raigo and like using Kuzans or Shirahoshis to deal with early characters, and doing the same thing as you would against Bonnie of being like a 7K leader with 1 life can just buy you a lot of time against Shanks as well. Ultimately, I just don't think there's really too many matchups that are really rough. Purple Luffy, when they have like their perfect curve, can be a huge nightmare sometimes, especially with the 9-cost moms that Russell was talking about. But other than that, I think a lot of things are very, very fixable, and this deck is just so inherently powerful that just Moria draws can beat almost anything.
Yeah, I agree. And my biggest thing is that like if this was something that if this format was like a little bit more developed here, I think that you could kind of adapt to it a little bit more. I think sometimes like Black Yellow Luffy has to like walk a line of what the meta is on like what can out your Sabo or what you have to play around. But once you kind of identify that and cement your gameplays around it, not a lot of decks can do a lot to it, which I think is very strong with it. So, yeah, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do think the more refined the format is, the better things get for you. Going into this, it's not really sure what we're expecting. If I get paired against a Bonnie, I think I'm going to get cooked most of the time.
Yeah.
If I end up bringing this. And if I have like a bunch of teach, I'm not going to be in the happiest spot. And trying to figure out what cards you need to deal with, like whether I want to be playing Ice Ages, where I think I need Ivankov to help more with the Delphi matchup. There's a bunch of different extra techs that feel like they're relatively small, but change a lot in terms of how the matchups play out. So it's a relatively like uncomfortable experience bringing a deck like BY into like the first week of a format.
Yeah, but I think there's also kind of on the inverse. One, I think some people have just decided this deck doesn't exist anymore, so they haven't been testing as much against it. So that could be a rude awakening for people to see it. I also think that the techs are not super solid, so it's hard to know what you're actually playing around. I think Raigo's been pretty understood as a staple in this deck at 2 or 3 copies for most people at this point, so that's less so. But stuff like Shirahoshi has been new. Honestly, like there's just been like this kind of like mini subset of like 3 to 4 cost blockers that you could play off like a Gecko Mori or something. So I've seen Shirahoshi's been really popular. I've been seeing cards like the Nami from Star Deck 14. That's been pretty common, I think, in general too. I've also seen like people play Rebecca with stuff like T-Bone. I think that was one of the lists actually. If I was to remember, I think it was Shinrei's list. Yeah, he's got this really interesting build as well with 3 Raigos, but also like the Rebecca, where you can use the T-Bone to cycle around. This also can get some removal with
Black's so broken.
Yeah.
What is this?
Yeah, you could just play whatever you want. I think I haven't had the itch to do it, but I think Black Yo Luffy. I think there's some really fun different techs that you could build with this leader right now. I know like the shell of it is like 40 cards, right? Like you have to play your 10 2Ks, you got to play 4 Garp, you got to play Sabo, Luffy. I guess you got to play the event sometimes at a couple copies. Honestly, the nothing's makes me want to play this card more than a meta where Teach is around. Because I know a lot of people say like, oh, Teach turning off Gecko Moria is really strong. Teach turning off your Sabo cycle is probably the worst thing for me though. This gets so much consistency, and losing that consistency hurts you so much in my experience. You feel bad for playing like a greedier deck. So I think that's something that hurts the deck a lot. Obviously, Moria is still a sadness, but there's that. Are there any kind of other techs though that you've been kind of looking for or tested with this deck or wanting to test with BY?
No, I think the main card that I was testing a lot with was just Ivankov and Nightmare Luffy that aren't in this list. I know a lot of people in the EU who were trying Nightmare Luffys and were enjoying them a lot. I just didn't really want to go back to playing Tempest Kicks and Ice Ages again, so I ended up just cutting him from the list. And I think the Ivankovs can help a lot in terms of awakening versus Dofi and buy you a ton of time. I was just struggling a little bit more against decks like Luffy and Shanks, and I wanted like a 4-cost Kuzan and like Shirahoshi's to kind of help with the KOing in that matchup.
Yeah, that's really fair. And I think this is more of recognizing your gameplay than necessarily a weakness. But I've been feeling like 5-cost Sabo in general is the weakest it's ever been. We have a lot of decks that have outs to it. Like Shanks has like 7 with its like either you can just make it not be able to block, you can put him down to 0 and Goldie Roger. You can also get hit by Ben Beckman can just put it into your trash gently, right? Purple has like 2 different ways to be able to rest it, right? Do you think that this is something that a lot of people have to adjust into, knowing how strong this card is now compared to like the obelisk it was previously? Or what's your thoughts on that?
You just unfortunately cannot turn your brain off as if you're playing against Lucci and just go, boom, we have a Sabo, we can be a 0 life a lot more often.
Yeah.
There's a lot more times you have to become a 1K or 1K or 1 life 7K, or like 9K 1 life later in the game. You just need a little bit more of a cushion because Sambo's going to buy you a lot of extra cards and time, but it isn't going to be the haymaker that just like immediately stops everything your opponent's doing anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's probably I don't think we're gonna see BY as popular as it was like at the end of I think OPO8 it was really popular and end of OPO8.5. I would contend it was probably the strongest deck in my mind for that format. I know
I'd
it was
agree.
pretty close to it, but and I know Dofi was rivaling it too, but because of that, I think the deck is still really strong. But because it's not immediately the best deck in the format, and because you do kind of have to work a little bit harder into some matchups, I do think there will be a little bit of a drop off. But there will also still be a lot of committed players who are can continue to play with it as well. So, anyone else have any thoughts on BY before we switch to the weakest deck that we have today? Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've been talking about this deck for like 6 months, and it's driving me a little bit mad because again, it's the same 40 cards, and I have to be like, oh, Shirahoshi, finally something to talk about. But yeah, I think in general though, you should respect to know what this deck does. You need to know. I think the best way to learn how to play against this deck is to play as the deck, even a couple games to figure out kind of where you can kind of squeeze some value or make some tough decisions for them. And I think it's going to be present. I would highly expect this deck to top at Cardfest this weekend too. So definitely keep an eye on that. And good luck to our BY players. And then lastly, oh no, oh shoot, I didn't bring up my deck. Dang it. Well, what can I do? I can go to the Your Decks on Eggman Events, which is a new feature. And I can load up my list right here. That's right. If you press this little button right here, you can save your deck and you can keep it here. Shout out to the Eggman Events, whoever they are, doing a lot of work for the community and such. But that aside, as mentioned earlier, I won't be at Cardfest. I feel like I'm cursed where I only do well at Treasure Cups, which is like a double curse because a lot of people think I have an invite. And I don't. They're like, "Oh, I saw your Marco run. Why aren't you going?" I'm like, "Oh, I didn't get an invite off that. I just got a Cavendish that no one wants to buy." So
That's crazy.
So Russell, if you do bring Bonnie, I need you to just like, play 5 copies of Cavendish. All right, make it so people need to buy that card. All right, that's all I need, so that goes up in value a little bit.
I'm pretty sure I'll be the only person in NA with 4 Cavendish.
Okay, all right.
At Cardfest, maybe one other guy. We'll see.
But I hope you do well because I for only support reasons, right? No of my own benefits from it. But if I did have an invite, I would likely be taking Red Purple Luffy. I've been enjoying this leader for a long time. I also think that it's Purple has been getting like incrementally stronger, and I think there's a lot of like Red didn't really have a lot of good top end cards until we got like Dragon. This is just a super good card for rush potential, OPO7. We also got like some new red hair stuff. I know like some people trying silver as well. I also think like if being able to ramp to this card is stupid strong, like it breaks the game a lot of the time because you are a 6K leader. This essentially turns you into a 7K leader on a 10K rush body, or 10 drop rush body that your opponent likely won't be able to get rid of on the next turn, and then you hit them with the second one, you kind of win the spot, in my mind. So it's a lot really consistent all the time, but again, this being paired up with a 6K leader is really strong, and being able to ramp to your 10 drop, I think is a really good kind of game mechanic. So this is definitely a build where you kind of map out your curve and how you play it. So we kind of ramp with the Zoro Juro as well as the Bon Clay. Nothing too special there. Yasop is just like a good kind of like intermediate turn a lot of the time too. And then I've also been playing a lot of these 7-drop Shanks. There's Sanji. This was I just did a testing stream with this, and this card actually ended up getting me a lot more value than I originally thought. We get to ramp to it very quickly. The fact that we have a 7K attack and a 6K attack with leader to kind of pressure whatever we rested is really good. And then we go from 7 down to 6. We go back up to 8. We use Luffy's effect to go to 9. And then we can play out like our 9-drop Luffy, our Dragon, or something like that. So otherwise, depending on the matchup, you can go to 7. You can play Sanji or Kid. I normally won't use the minus effect because I want to go to 10 on the next turn to be able to drop Shanks and get that effect. So, but yeah, I don't know. I've been testing this deck a lot. I don't even think this is an optimal build. I feel like my build changes a little bit every day, but I just think there's something there. There's something to do with like the ramp of purple with red is really good. You also get like a little bit of like an advantage against people just not knowing how to play against 6K leaders. Kind of the same thing as Shanks, where if they don't know how to play against Shanks, I think that this deck is good just inherently. You get out of it a lot of attacks inherently too. And the last thing is, as we kind of mentioned too, a lot of this is that like Doflamingo is a little bit of a scary matchup because you have 3 life and they like to hit you a lot, but at the same kind of way, I think you get out of a lot of attacks for free by being a 6k leader. A lot of times we're like a 7k leader with Yasop or with Kid, which means that they don't really get the same amount of pressure as they normally would. And if you're able to stabilize against them, I feel like you're a really good spot. And then obviously if you're able to drop 10 drop Shanks on curve, they giving them all their attackers a -1k just feels really bad, and some players really can't kind of adapt to that as well. So I think this deck is good. I think it's been a little bit lackluster for us here in the States, but I would highly bring this. I would test it a lot more if I was going, and I think it's in a pretty good spot for this meta in general. So I'll let you guys judge me from bottom to top. We'll go with Jackson. What's your thoughts on Red Purple Luffy?
No, I think Red Purple Luffy is really good. A lot of people have been trying to sell me on the deck, and I haven't been playing it just because I know like the glaring weakness is that you're pretty weak to Dofi, and any deck that's weak to Dofi kind of gets crossed off my list. But I think the deck is really good into the rest of the format. I know you're good into Purple Luffy, you're good into BY, you're good into a lot of decks. And yeah, I mean, just commenting on your list, like one thing that I thought about like is 5-cost Rayleigh better than Queen because you can play it earlier for basically the same effect. And then the other thing was, I think this was in Kai's video where he decided to play the 4-cost Frankie, the one that you can dot -2 for the same effect as Queen, because if you do it when you're both at 10, now you can play Sanji blocker for 3 because you're 2 down behind your opponent, and then you can kind of cheat out more down that way. But those are the only 2 things I thought about. But I haven't touched the deck. It's a fun deck. Yeah, just being weak to Dofi is just kind of a turn off for me.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I have, as you see, I have saved 4 decks, and 3 of them are this one. But I've definitely have tried the Frankie in it. I think it's good, and like the fact that you get to get the, as you said, the plays that you go from 10 to 8 with this effect. You play Sanji for 3 because it's you're at less Dawn, and then you can get the Dawn back with Luffy. My only issue is that like usually, in most situations at the end game, it's either I have 1 blocker or 0. Like it doesn't matter how many blockers I have out. I think most of the time is if I have one at all, because generally I think blockers are pretty weak at end game situations, and most of the time I'd rather keep like the 2k in hand or have like the Dawn ready for Gum Gum Giant, or even just play useless Captain Kid to make myself a 7k leader. So that's been my biggest issue with that. Also, I really like this card, and when I was expecting more teach for this, I saw Russell like not see this card ever, so I'm gonna read it for him real quick. Main, add up to 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck active. Then if your opponent has a character with 6k power, such as like a Edward Weevil or a Boa, you get to get another Dawn active. So for 1 Dawn, like you get 2 Dawn active. It's so good. Like I've seen a lot of people like, oh shoot, and then that means I get to 8 to 9 very quickly. The trigger off life, even though we don't trigger a lot of life, is pretty good. So it's really interesting, especially if you want to go first curve. Sometimes just playing it for 3 and ramping 1 is still your best play. So I don't know. I've been testing a lot of this a lot. So I think that's really fair though on the Frankie, and I've definitely tested it. But I just found like even with Queen, sometimes on 5 I just play it and I just don't use the Dawn minus effect. It's the same as if Silvers, because most of the time they won't have the double 5k. And then late game, this costs 4 Dawn if I don't have any other way to lose a Dawn with leader effects. So that's generally my like for it. But I also think Silvers is a good card too. It's just, man, I wish it was, the condition was a little bit more flexible for its draw 2, trash 1. It's just a little bit unfortunate from there. So what about you, Russell? What's your thoughts on Red Purple Luffy?
I think it's a good call. I have 3 friends that are gonna be playing it in Orlando, so everyone's like, I got the spice. Like you're supposed to play this instead of this. No one else was playing it, and that's why this deck's broken. And I'm like, got it. But I mean, it's red, it's purple, it's 6k leader, it's the norm, and I don't know. I think the deck's solid. It runs one of the best cards in the game in Gum Gum Giant, so I'm all about it. I think the deck's
this card fixes Red Purple Luffy so much. The fact that one, they never want to attack into you because they'll go like, I guess I can go 9k, and you're like, cool, Gum Gum Giant, and then also I get out of the attack, I don't lose any card advantage, but I also fix my broken hand into finding something to play next turn. Yeah, card it's really what red purple needed. It's like any kind of cycle or card searching, and the fact that we can use it so freely, because late game we just always ramp 1. We're almost always at 10 dawn passing the turn, which is really nice. So I
also think it got pushed to the point where like I'm starting to enjoy more rogue ideas that have like a very oppressive game plan once your opponent stumbles. And I think like this is very much a deck where like if your opponent stumbles 1 turn and then you just like slam back to back 9, like a 7 drop into like a 9 or 10 drop, and then they had a mediocre like 5 or 6 dawn turn. This is very much one of those decks where like you can kind of blow out the game.
Yeah.
And I think having that is a really good like pocket pick, as opposed to like the other rogue stuff that I've tested and all the other garbage I'm playing with. So like, yeah, I really like the idea. And then purple ramping is always nasty.
And I think you've hit the key point that this is rogue. I will not contend that this is tier 1 or anything like that. But I've always liked a bit of the rogue deck. As kind of mentioned too, I like getting the advantage of like my opponent not knowing 100% the best way to play against me. I know that if I'm in a fair fight, I'm gonna lose 9 times out of 10. So I gotta skew the odds in my favor a little bit by hitting them with some unexpected things. So and again, I still get these are not like high stake games, but I still get so much free advantage from people forgetting how to swing into 6K leaders sometimes, or not recognizing like the best way, because there so many people are in that 5K math that being a 6K can really mess up a lot of lines and make people just make the suboptimal one, which I think we can get advantage from. So and then Yonas, I know that I unsuccessfully convinced you to play this deck, but I know that you are.
You tried, for sure.
I did try.
I do think this deck's very powerful, and like I don't think any deck competes with you in the late game. I just think you just need to draw the right mix of cards too often, and I think that the Gum Giants help a huge amount to kind of make that happen. But I think a lot of times if you just like stumble on like a relatively developmental turn, and you don't get like a Zorojuro or a Bond Clay, and you're off by a whole other turn, or you just don't have the 7-cost kit against Dofi, or you don't have the Shankses in like the relatively slow matchups, like too many things can kind of go wrong. And that's my main downside. I really just want to play a relatively consistent deck in this kind of tournament. So I've kind of been putting this on the back burner, but when you high roll with this deck, I just don't think any deck can beat it. And that includes Dofi. If you just like see the Yasop into the 7-cost kid into the 10-cost Shanks, even like the best Dofi draws or average Dofi draws are going to lose a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think that I think that it's slightly, it's probably, if I was based on my own testing, it's probably like 45, 55 from the decks I've played against Dofi. These are not like, again, super solid players, so that could easily skew to 40, 60, but if you're like looking at this deck at all and you think like the Doflamingo matchup is difficult, I've found a good amount of success in being able to do that. And again, I think there's going to be a lot of people on Doflamingo who it's kind of like, how do I say it, a best deck in format syndrome, where people kind of like tunnel vision, like, oh, I'm the best deck, they have to respect me, I don't have to respect them, kind of thing. I've definitely seen that kind of attitude when people play against this deck, and it gives me a bit of an edge when they make a misstep or not recognize I have an answer to a situation they've presented me. So I think that I've always kind of liked that edge of where like I have to, like, my opponent has to respect what I'm doing, and if they don't, then I get so much advantage from it. So cool. But yeah, I think I like this deck a lot. I really hope this top 32, it would make my weekend. I'd be you'll hear me cheering from California when it does. So I like this deck a lot, and it's very fun. So we'll have to see if January is good for all purple Luffys, because again, this did get top 4 last year, right, with Victor. So it's gotta come back, and a year later prove that it's still one of the best decks in the format, and I'm excited to see if that's the case as well. So that's kind of all the stuff that we had kind of planned for this one. We're actually kind of closer to an hour than I thought I would be, but any kind of like closing remarks from you guys, or anything that you guys are expecting from Florida or anything? And we'll start with we'll go back to Yonas. We'll go back to 4th.
I'm just excited to see what people bring. You kind of mentioned in the beginning that people have been relatively cagey with a lot of their deck lists, a lot of like their texts and their strategies. And this is one of the more open formats that we've had for our nationals. So I'm really excited to see what people bring. And I'm playing the boogeyman of the format. So I'm not making anything relatively exciting, but I'm hoping some other people kind of put me in the dirt because of their deck building decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's always the tough thing when I'm definitely the kind of a person who like tries to deck build to target the best deck in the format. So you have to be playing your best still, even if you are playing the best deck in the format.
Yeah.
What about you, Russell?
Open format, almost every deck is highly skillful to pilot. I would honestly think like Pluffy might be the easiest one, and even then, you might have to pick a 7-drop or 4-drop off your law or something like that, and so that can make or break your decision making for hitting your curve. But like, I don't know. I think we're actually in one of my favorite formats of all time. Like, I think this format's very, very good. The losses that I take when I'm not playing Blackbeard, it feels so like earned. Like I'm like, oh, I can blatantly see why I misplayed here. This is definitely a disadvantageous state, like this matchup and so forth. I also gave up on playing a rogue deck like 3 or 4 weeks ago, so I feel relatively confident in like how I'm gonna perform, as well as I don't know. I feel like when I look at the results for most tournaments in this format, players that have had strong performances in the past are then putting up numbers consistently in this format, as well as like I'm seeing night and day gameplay interactions with similar lists. So I will watch someone new to Dofi, and you can pretty much very much tell they're new to Dofi, and someone extremely experienced and like knows their lines ins and out, and how quickly they play it, as well as like how confidently they play it. I mean, that's all I want out of a format. I want the skill of a pilot to push a deck that's like blatantly tier 1 to like show why it's tier 1, and then other decks that are like roguish to know why they're tier 2 or tier 1.5 and so forth. So I think I mean I'm gonna see no surprises at all in this tournament. However, I'm hoping I top. But
yeah, I hope you do too, and I still hope you get hit by surprises though. I want.
I'm super down. Bonnie's all about surprises.
Yeah,
they do not fear the random ramp decks or Omega heal decks. That's not the problem. Just Lucci.
Yes, that is true. That is true. And then Jackson, with your hopeful defending title run, we'll see how it goes for you. Any kind of closing remarks for this weekend and hopes and such?
I think biggest thing is just basically, regardless of result, I'm gonna be excited to see everybody again in person. In-person events are always the funnest, whether you meet new people or just hang out with people that you talk to online a lot but never get to see in person a lot. And then also, like, again, regardless of result, I'm excited to see who our last 2 representatives are gonna be. And then we'll have like our Fat Five to send the world and hopefully do well at Worlds next year. Excited to find out who they are and maybe play test together, and then hopefully we can do NA well at Worlds.
Yeah, I think that's going to be really exciting, and I haven't hard committed to that yet, but it really did come down to me though, just a little of like, it's almost comparable to go to like Japan for like a week and a half or Florida for a weekend. I'm like, which one do I prefer? So, but I hope to be there. Cardfest Finals was a lot of fun last year. And I know that both you and Yonas were there, and it's cool to see you guys on the big stage. So regardless of what happens this weekend, congrats again to you. Good luck on that as well. And again, I'm really looking forward to seeing how this weekend goes. I think it will be it's going to be a lot of fun to go over the data once I get there too. So I think that's going to be it for us. This is probably one of our more structured close and end ones. Normally we tempted to talk for like 90 minutes, but I'm going to let you guys go. I know a lot of you guys are traveling in the next little bit, so safe travels on that way as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. Really do appreciate it. Safe travels to everyone. Good luck for your Cardfest finals, and we'll catch you all next time.